Today on Biblical Higher Ed Talk, I sit down with Marvin Oxenham. As the General Secretary of the European Council for Theological Education, Marvin has a unique perspective on biblical and theological education throughout Europe. Thank you for tuning in today. I'm your host, Philip Dearborn, president of ABHE, and my guest this week is Marvin Oxenham. Marvin is a distinguished ministry career in church planting and theological education in Europe, and he currently serves as the General Secretary of a sister organization to ABHE, the European Council for Theological Education. Think ABHE just within a European context, and that's some of what we're going to talk about of what theological, biblical higher education looks like in Europe. Both Marvin and I serve on the board of ECTE, the International Council for Evangelical Theological Education. He's also a staff member there. In addition, in his spare time, I guess, he's also a faculty member at London School of Theology. And I've invited Marvin in to talk about what he's seeing in theological education. And he's actually joining us from Rome, where he lives. He was born in Italy and has been in Europe for pretty much all of his life, with a couple trips here and there. But welcome to the show, Marvin.
Thank you. Great to be here. Thank you for inviting me, Phil.
Absolutely. So you've been in Europe. You're European, really. I think you have a Canadian citizenship. Is that correct?
Both Canadian and Italian citizenship, yes.
Okay. So pretty much all of your life in Europe, in Italy, and in the U.S., we often hear of the postmodern Christian reality throughout Europe. Post-Christian, postmodern. From your vantage point, what's the current state of the church and theological education in this particular time?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Phil. And certainly, Europe is a very big place, and it's very diversified. And so to be able to make any sort of generalization on the church and theological education in Europe, it's like asking me to talk about how is food in Europe. It's there's a lot of everything and everything in between. But certainly Europe is a unique place. I did my doctoral work on the history of higher education in Europe in particular, and tracing sort of movements from pre-modernity to modernity and into post-modernity or liquid modernity. And that's to say that I would not say that everything about post-modernity is necessarily bad. There was also a lot of many brilliant things in modernity or in pre-modernity. But certainly the church has changed. Certainly Europe is a place of secularization, of materialism, but it is also a place of great spiritual hunger. And it may not be an established religion. And so I think, we've had enough established religion, and all you need to do is travel to Europe and look at our cities. Our architecture is, it's of every kind all over the place, because religion was firmly established in society in Europe, with the good and the bad. So I think there are people that many Europeans would not consider themselves religious, but if you then drill in, they would consider themselves spiritual. So that does offer the church many opportunities to reinvent itself, to think differently. And, sometimes as I travel around the world, as I'm European, they go, oh, you poor people in Europe. It's like, it's the God-forsaken place on the planet now, and where things are really happening is in Africa or in Asia or somewhere else. And obviously, those that study missions see a clear shift to the global south, in terms of numbers. But I would resist the rhetoric that the European church is wrapped up and finished. It is dynamic, it's vibrant, it's deep, it's creative. There's some fantastic leaders. There's some really cutting-edge movements in the church, reinventing itself. Obviously, the level of literacy is very high in Europe, so there's also a high level of engagement with knowledge and understanding of the Christian faith. So I would say that there is certainly hope in Europe, but we need to understand the European church, which is different. We can't report of thousands of people getting saved in evangelistic rallies. That's maybe not part of our current history. So for theological education, do you want me to move on to the second part of the question?
Yeah, please. Yep.
So theological education, it sort of follows the same trend. And again, I hear people saying, "Oh, theological education in Europe, colleges are closing, and basically that nothing is being done, and the missions movement is over from Europe." And certainly there have been many deep and significant changes. But theological education in Europe is alive and well. As the European Council, we collect student numbers of our accredited schools across Europe. And just in the last 2 years, we've had an increase in student numbers of over 50%.
Wow.
In Europe.
Wow.
Now, maybe some of our schools are counting different, but we do try to be accurate with our numbers. And I can give you the exact numbers if you'd like. I'm sort of against throwing out data. So I think it's exactly like 52% or something. And then depending on head count or actual numbers. But that's to say that there is a quality of young people and not so young people that really want to engage with theology. I was recently speaking with the leaders of Francophone theological schools in Switzerland and France, and they were saying, as theological educators, they can't keep up with the demand for pastors. They simply can't train enough young people to be able to fill the requests for pastors in France in particular. Now, that could be because there's a generation of pastors that are simply retiring. Again, it is very dynamic, very varied, and I think you have a question about that a little further.
Yeah, it is, and it follows trends that we're seeing in the United States and Canada as well, where it feels like the supply chain of ministry leaders, the next generation of pastors, there's quite a demand for new pastors, and that's because of growth. That's because of pastors retiring. But I like what you said at the beginning and how you started to answer the question of, and that's something that it's something that we don't realize here as much in the United States and Canada. We're essentially two countries, 50 states, territories, and provinces in Canada. But as a comparison to Europe, you're talking about, how many countries, and each one of those countries having a very different culture and perspective. So working within theological education is particularly layered and difficult because you're working through some of those cultural challenges.
Exactly. One thing I wanted to mention about the church, and it relates to theological education, we are seeing a movement, and I think this is part of one of the things that postmodernity has brought, sort of a bit more of a skepticism in the one authoritative leader in society and therefore in the church. So there's certainly a move towards more distributed leadership patterns in the church. So a lot of churches are being led by bi-vocational professionals, and that of course changes the nature and the graduate profiles of theological education. It's not like it was 50 or 100 years ago that there was a very straightforward trajectory into a full-time ministry and you prepared people for that. Now we're training lawyers and doctors and leaders of migrant communities. They're really taxi drivers, and they want theological education. And it clearly looks a lot different, both in content but also in delivery patterns.
Yeah, I think that's for our movement of biblical and theological education. I think that's a positive trend. We're seeing that as well, especially if you look at it from a biblical or theological perspective in the New Testament and the formation of the church. I think a result of modernity was the separation or the professionalization of ministry, where prior to that, you were a farmer and you pastored a church and you were part of a community. And I think during modernity, we kind of separated it out, professionalized it. Not necessarily a bad thing, and we need full-time professional ministry leaders. But that's not the exclusive way for men and women to engage in ministry. And we're all called, regardless of occupational context, to step into ministry contexts.
It's the priesthood of all believers, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah.
Actually did a survey. We run student satisfaction surveys. One of the questions we ask theology students in Europe is why you're studying theology, and of the options, preparing for pastorate, other ministry, or personal formation. And 50% of our students in Europe have answered the latter. They are doing theology for personal development. They're not looking their ministry. They're not looking for a career as a professional, whatever, leader in the church or elsewhere. They want to know the Bible and know God, and they're going to theological schools to do that.
Wow. Wow. So let's switch gears over towards the European Council for Theological Education. You and I have had conversations about this. I think it might be helpful for our audience to know this. You've recently changed your name, or within the last couple of years changed your name, and evangelical was in your name. And evangelical in the European context has a different connotation than in North America. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, that's a long story. There's a very good publication that's just come out on evangelicalism in Europe, published together with the European Evangelical Alliance and a number of scholars. And it's a fantastic collection of papers offering different points of view on what evangelicalism is about in Europe today. So I would strongly advise our readers to get a copy of that. I can provide the link and the title. Actually, one of our board members, Frank Hinkelman from ECTE, is one of the editors of that. Sorry, what was the question again?
taking evangelical out of the name.
Oh yeah, it was just the observation that for many of our schools, the word evangelical, although there's no sort of recriminating on the traditions and where we're coming from and our theological positions, but the actual term was creating more problems in trying to explain what it didn't mean than what it actually did mean. So there was, obviously you can imagine there was a significant debate. But we now, as ECTE, that's our acronym, we also offer accreditation services to other faith traditions. But we now, so evangelical schools, but also other faith traditions. We've had contacts with the Coptic Church, the Orthodox Church, with some other movements. So certainly evangelical in our history and in our positions. But the word, and I think words are important, and
words really are, and we're experiencing it here specifically in the United States from a political perspective, where this concept of Christian nationalism, which has a negative connotation, has kind of been slapped on our institutions, our movement, which I wouldn't necessarily say is fair. But words do matter, and their associations. And I think we have to be careful that as we navigate through leading in our sector for biblical and theological education, the public responds to those labels, whether fair or not. And I think we have to be aware of it. So thanks for saying that about your experiences there in Europe. So the Council for Theological Education, the European Council for Theological Education, here in the U.S., we're our listeners, vast majority from North America. We're very familiar with our U.S. Department of Education, our 50 states. There are regulatory elements associated with that. There are dollars associated with that. In fact, some of that is the reason why the regulation is the way it is. In order to be accredited in North America, you have to be accredited. In order to receive Title IV funding, loans, grants, you have to be accredited by a U.S. Department of Education recognized accreditor. ABHE is that. None of that really exists in Europe the same way. So walk us through, how does accreditation look like in Europe? How is it regulated?
So, wind the clock back a few decades, and European higher education was completely in the hands of the local nation states. So Germany had their own system, England had their own system, France had their own system, and they were impermeable. They had their own traditions, they had their own degree structures, their own credit systems, their own nomenclatures, and of course their own accreditation systems. Most of them tied to the national government, so the equivalent of a Ministry of Education, or sometimes it was delegated, as in the case of the UK, to universities, or in other cases to accrediting agencies that were recognized by the state. Then the Bologna process came along, which is a process of unifying many things in Europe. This is the process of unifying higher education. So there was a lot done at the level of, we now have one common credit system for all the European universities. We have a common degree structure, 3+2 bachelor and a 2-year master. So there's a lot of things that have been worked on. And together with that, the accreditation, there's a really strong effort to harmonize the different accreditation systems. So the Bologna process has also covered accreditation. And there is a register in Europe, it's called the European Quality Assurance Register, where all quality assurance agencies that are compliant with the European standards and guidelines for accreditation are listed on that register. So there's an external review of an accrediting agency by independent reviewers against the published standards. And if you're compliant, then you're listed on that particular register. So as ECTE, we've been listed for 4 years now on the register, and we're coming up for our second review actually next month. So we're in the full of our own compliance exercise. But we are a cross-border accrediting association, which means that unless there's an agreement with the national government, we cannot simply waltz into Germany and accredit degrees. So quality assurance, we can recognize the nature and the quality of the qualifications that are being offered, but there's a very complex map in Europe, and it's called system openness to cross-border accreditation. So as a subject-specific cross-border accrediting agency, there are many challenges, but at the same time, some very, very good opportunities. And might I say, there's one thing, this may be interesting to your folk. When we were under scrutiny as an accrediting agency to be listed on the Quality Assurance Register, nothing was ever said about the subject that we specialize in, which is theology. We were treated as if we were accrediting engineering or mathematics or physics or philosophy. The subject itself, it never entered into discussion, which we really appreciated as a sign of high culture and civility in Europe. And a lot of the issues that you struggle with as well, around, gender and social engineering and that sort of thing, it never came onto the radar screen. None of that is in the European standard guidelines for accrediting agencies.
Yeah, totally different environment. So how many, would you know offhand how many religious or faith-based or church-related accreditors there are in Europe?
Very few. There's us, there's the Catholic, the ABEPRO, and I believe that's it.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And
there are some, like the Lutheran Church, they have university departments typically in Germany. England, theological schools in England, there's a different system there. They go to a university to obtain validation from university. So it's not a state centralized, so they don't need a specific accrediting agency. But in terms of the subject specific, to my knowledge, it's just us and the Catholics.
Okay. So in the U.S., money is attached to accreditation through grants and loans. Would that be the same in Europe?
It's a country by country. So in England, I'm familiar with London School of Theology. I was academic dean there for a while, so I've spilt the same blood in the same mud as a lot of deans. And I remember my first year as a dean, I spent more time in Excel than in Word.
There's a good leadership lesson there.
And so, clearly in the UK, yes, the accreditation and to be listed with Office for Students is linked to student loans. In other countries, it depends. There isn't a student loan system. In some countries, university education is completely free. In other countries, it's very cheap. So it's not really a problem. But it varies much from country to country.
And maybe drill down a little bit further with the Council for Theological Education. How many institutions do you accredit?
So we have about 80 plus institutions in our network, and we accredit about 45 of those. And some are in the Middle East as well, because we had a footprint in the Middle East before our sister organization, Manati, was founded in the Middle East. So for decades, Middle Eastern schools looked to Europe for accreditation. So we have about 40, we accredit about 80 some programs.
Okay. And then any connection with U.S., so I know ATS, Theological Education Accreditor here in North America, are they involved at all in Europe, or are the lines very distinct with accreditors?
The lines are very distinct. We do have some theological schools that could not obtain accreditation. And that is also something to be said as sort of aside. There are some contexts in Europe where accreditation from the state for theological schools is simply not possible. There's no room. In some cases, it's because they're too small. So, like, in some cases, if you don't have X number of students, you can't even apply for accreditation. Or if you don't have, $500,000, in the bank of equity, don't even show up. In other cases, it is like, for example, in France, it is constitutionally illegal to accredit theological education because they are a laicist state. So for them, theology and higher education are oxymorons. They don't mix. And so even the Catholic Church, apart from one region, which is the Alsace, which has its own statute, but in France, there are no accredited degrees in theology of any kind, and there never will be unless there's a change in the Constitution. And that gives you a picture of the variance.
Wow. So then that would mean you have no accredited institutions in France, but there would be, there's theological training happening. They're simply not accredited.
Well, that's where we enter the picture as ECTE. A lot of these schools that either can't get accreditation from their national governments, they come to us. And so we offer them a level of quality assurance. They get accreditation externally, but they cannot claim to offer degrees that are nationally recognized in their country.
Okay.
They offer quality assured qualifications. They're listed on the register. It's a funny game, but it corresponds to reality. That there are, and they're called in Europe, we have two categories. We have higher education institutions. Their university is recognized by the state. And then we have alternative providers of higher education learning opportunities. Most theological schools in Europe that we work with are the latter.
Wow. So then in how many European countries are you in?
We're in 28 different countries between Europe and the Middle East.
Okay. So pretty broad. So you're having to stay current. How often do things change? Does the environment change country by country? Is it pretty much set? Or do you have to stay on top of all of those regulations and what's happening in each country?
Well, certainly the Bologna process helps because a lot of things are coming from the center. So they're coming from Brussels, they're coming from the ministers of education that are meeting, and we're part of the networks of the higher education, so we're the things that are happening. And then usually what's happening national is a reflection of those things. Now, clearly there are, idiosyncrasies in each country, and we need to learn the ropes. When we go into an accredited school, we do research with them on the local reality to try to align as best possible.
Yeah. One of the things that you've been working on through ICETE, which has been appreciated from ABHE side, is we have accreditors represented from around the world and trying to align standards from region to region. While you would think that there's a lot of similarity, and there is, but there are also a lot of differences and nuances because it's a global kind of a thing. Just give us a couple of minutes on how you approach that process of aligning all of those standards, because it's a global.
Review of ICETE?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, several years ago, we had a global consultation. We brought together all of our accredited agencies. There was one question on the floor. What are the common denominators of quality that we see across the world in theological education? What does quality mean? And so beyond the regional differences, what are the common denominators? And so we spent several days, and it was a long consultation before, during, after, Excel over, and we came down with an agreed set, and those that have been published now, they're called the Standards and Guidelines for Global Evangelical Theological Education. And each one of us accrediting agencies have taken those and incorporated them into their own standards. So there's a high level of similarity now in the standards that are being used for accreditation. And I believe ABHE as well has referenced that in your handbook revision. And now moving into a second process, which is called the alignment process with ICETE, because the standards are one thing, the way accreditation is actually done, the criteria and procedures is another thing. So the alignment process has set some external standards for how to do quality assurance, of what kind of agency you need to be able to do it with quality. And again, we've looked at the examples from around the world in higher education, and we've put those into a handbook. And now in this coming year, 2026, most of ICETE agencies will undergo an external review, including to be ICETE aligned.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that for the cause of for global biblical and theological education, I think that process is so important, and I think for us, it's also an opportunity to learn from different parts of the world of how biblical and theological education is done, because we can get fairly myopic in our perspective, especially within all of the work that we have to do with the U.S. Department of Education, and we kind of forget that there is the rest of the world. In that process, there are best practices that are happening. One of those, which I know you're particularly passionate about, is micro credentialing. So what is it? Because I know we play with it on the fringes in the United States and Canada. But in Europe, it's a pretty big deal, and so tell us a little bit about that and how theological education is leveraging micro credentialing.
Yeah, in Europe, micro-credentials is a very big deal. It's probably one of the hotter topics in higher education at the moment, but globally as well. If you look, for example, at INQUAHE, which is the global network of quality assurance agencies in higher education, every other webinar they're doing is on micro-credentials. It's big in the South Pacific. It's quickly growing in Africa and in Asia as well, and Latin America. I mean, it is a growing phenomenon. And basically, at the very fundamental level, we are used to, when we think of a higher education qualification, in the States, I believe you begin with associate, which is sort of the lowest qualification. It's your qualification, and then we have words like bachelor, master, and doctoral, which, by the way, all come from Europe and from the medieval tradition. And they, and that sort of that iron grip of those words for degrees has never been broken. It's been exported from Europe all over the world in various ways, and has remained sort of the golden standard of higher education. We use those words. What micro-credentials does is it breaks the back of that, and it makes higher education qualification much smaller. As small as in Europe, we use our credit counting system, which is ECTS. A micro-credential can be as small as 1 or 2 ECTS, which is about 50 hours of learning. Not your Carnegie hours, physical hours of learning. And they can represent a micro-credential. So very specific, focused on a skill or competence, or on a very particular domain of knowledge. They can be offered at all levels. Qualification frameworks, they can be offered at your basic tertiary or even non-tertiary level, all the way up to doctoral level. But they are higher education qualifications, and that's the difference, because short courses have been around forever. MOOCs, the whole MOOC phenomenon, and where that sort of fell over, it did a lot of good things, but where MOOCs sort of lost their steam was that students started saying, well, can we get a credential for this?
Right.
And so you had some universities that stepped up to the plate. Oh yeah, give us a few $100 and we'll give you credit for that. So what the micro-credentialing movement is actually doing is making those university qualifications, the micro-credentials. And the graduate of the future is envisioned to not necessarily have a degree or a graduate degree or something, but a portfolio of micro-credentials that will then also represent, continued professional development, innovation. In Europe, I think there's a reason why this is being pushed, and it's economic. We can no longer compete with China in terms of manufacture. So Europe is very keen to become a knowledge economy. And there's one target that's been set by an organization in Europe, is that by year 2035, 65% of all European citizens will be involved in higher education every year.
Wow.
That's never going to happen in the degree system.
Yeah,
it will
right.
happen for credentials. Now, in terms of theological education, a fantastic opening, again, to come back to the priesthood of all believers, to offer theological education in small little bits. And I use the analogy of Lego. The micro-credentials are little pieces of Lego that can be offered, and then they can be built. They can be stacked onto each other into larger qualifications, but that will reach people that would never darken the door of our seminaries. They don't have the money, they don't have the time, they don't have the need. Micro-credentialing movement, I think, is something that, beyond what's happening in higher education, I think we need to see a prophetic opportunity for us theological educators in that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's my hope and prayer, because I do see tremendous value in micro-credentialing. And I've often talked in terms of nested sets. As you're building out your associate's degree to your bachelor's to your master's to your doctorate, there's an efficiency in understanding like a set of bowls, right? That you can hit multiple populations with various course offerings from the smallest unit of a course all the way to a degree, and allowing students to not. The efficiency is the courses are being offered, but it can meet different criteria from a micro-credential all the way through to a degree. And I think it matches where we are even globally from a workplace experience. The Department of Education here in the U.S. puts out a statistic every year of the anticipated number of occupations college graduates will have in a lifetime. That number is now 10. That our graduates will experience 10 different occupations in a lifetime. Well, there's absolutely no way a degree is going to qualify you for each one of those different occupations. We're all learning along the way, formalized, non-formalized education, and this micro-credentialing. And it goes into blockchain as well as a way to validate not only your experiences but the education and qualifications that you have in order to. And I do think it is the future. I just can't figure out why it hasn't taken off here in the States like it has in Europe.
Yeah, and there's a danger, of course, because micro-credentialing, if once the word catches on as a buzzword, we're going to have people offering micro-credentials from their garages. So that's why it's so important for us as accrediting agencies to make sure that we have accreditation systems in place, quality assurance systems in place for micro-credentials that are going to be different from the larger qualifications. Yeah. And we've actually begun with ECTE. We are now actually on the European register. We are also registered to accredit micro-credentials. So we've already accredited 3 providers. We've done a 4th review that will start formally offering accredited micro-credentials. And as you say, it is, in Europe, we talk about new skilling, upskilling, and reskilling. And I mean, coming back to the example of Excel, when I was a dean and I didn't know how to use Excel, I didn't want to have time to do a degree in information technology. I wanted a 10-hour Microsoft course on the basics, and that's all I wanted. I didn't care about whether that builds into anything else. Of course, if I could get credit and a micro-credential for that, and it was quality assured, then I could put it in my portfolio and it counted something, all the better.
Yeah. And I think that may put a finger on one of the resistant points here in North America to micro-credentialing is who's at the center of the education. Is it the institution or is it the student? And I think we give great lip service to we're about students and meeting the needs of students. I'm not sure in practice we're there yet. And even how you articulated that, if what do I need in order? I don't need this full thing. Well, you're the one in the driver's seat as the student, as the consumer, and the pushback is it's a consumer. We're meeting the demands of the customer, and when we start using business terms like that, people, especially in the academy, get really, really nervous. But I think it's going to be a matter of we're going to need this. Our system of offering degrees is we can't pivot fast enough to meet the demand. So somebody's going to figure out how to get around that. And I think you're starting to see that happen.
It's a tightrope that we have to walk. Of course, if the only kind of theological education was micro-credentials, and all we're doing is scratching where it itches, there's a lot that we're missing out on, because there's not going to be many that are going to itch to have biblical languages, or to, to hermeneutics to a high level. They may not even know that exists. Clearly, as the scholars in the field, we do need to structure learning in a way, and we have a fantastic tradition in theological education on how to do that. But at the same time, we do need to acknowledge that maybe we're not scratching where it itches. So, like, you take COVID. COVID hits. And within a few weeks, every pastor on the planet is doing worship on Zoom. Yeah. Who in the world trained them how to do that? Nobody. It wasn't part of their training if they had a theological education. So with micro-credentials, if they had been in place, theological schools across the world on a dime could have created within a week or two micro-credentials with their expertise on, what does worship look like without physical presence? and offer that kind of training. Credentials with their expertise, but you need to be very much in contact with your stakeholders.
You got it. Yep.
That is a very big part of our accreditation in Europe. It's very much about, how are your stakeholders involved in what you do.
Yeah. Marvin, this has been a great week. We probably could have done an entire episode or two on micro-credentialing. I know it's an area of passion for you, and I appreciate all of the work that you've done with ICETE, with the other our sister organizations, across the globe in how to address this. So thank you for this conversation. We have 2 minutes left. So in those 2 minutes, what would you say is the single greatest threat and then single greatest opportunity for theological education in Europe?
Yeah. Okay. If I can take out the word single, I'm happier. How about a threat and a opportunity?
Okay, that works because we only have 2 minutes.
I'm not sure I have the expertise to do a proper hierarchy, but I mean, certainly, I think one threat, and it sort of closes the circle where we started from, is the threat of defeatism and complacency. There are theological schools closing in Europe. Spurgeon College closed dramatically a few months ago. And I think there is a threat of a sort of, a rhetoric of doom and so to lose hope. So I would certainly say that is a threat to lose hope. The opportunity, I think one of the very significant opportunities we're seeing in Europe now is the migrant church. We're getting more and more very significant migrant communities. Some of them are integrating, others are not integrating. But a lot of these have quite strong faith-based communities, usually led by untrained migrants who cannot get training back in their own country of origin, in their language of origin. Some of the European approaches and even the languages are not conducive for them. So the opportunity to engage with theological education for the migrant church in Europe, and we already do. We work with several of these. Actually, in the last year, I think I counted, we had 6 new providers that came to us as ECTE who are working with migrants.
Wow.
One is working with professional business people from Muslim background, and they're lay leaders in churches and they're doctors and lawyers in Germany or in Europe. And this organization is doing theological training for them. And another one is working in Rome here. There's a huge Chinese community. And so there's the Chinese-Italian Theological Seminary, who teach in Mandarin in downtown Rome. Wow. Second generation migrants who are now starting to speak Italian and feel more Italian than Chinese. So there's all sorts of really complex dynamics, but a huge opportunity.
Yeah. Well, Marvin, this conversation has been fantastic. I appreciate the work that you're doing, not only for ICETE, but also with the European Council for Theological Education. Thoroughly enjoy spending time with you and appreciate you sharing your wisdom with us today.
Phil, thanks so much for having me. It was great. And hello from Italy to all of your audience.
Absolutely. And if you'd like to find more information about the European Council for Theological Education, in the show description, we'll put a link to the website. Marvin has also authored several books in areas of passion, and I highly recommend that you look at those, and we'll definitely put links in our show description directly so that you can go to Amazon and purchase those books. So until next time, stay kingdom focused.
The Biblical Higher Ed Talk podcast is proud to be a part of the Higher Ed Marketer Podcast Network. Discover even more conversations, resources, and tools to help you grow your institution at thehigheredmarketer.com, your go-to community for all things higher ed marketing and leadership.